Kabara tweets in French, which we've translated, saying the recruitment of mercenaries is facilitated by the presence of TAM Oil. That's a Libyan government-owned oil group, he says, headed by Gaddafi's cousin. The recruitment in 22 African countries. Well, plenty of material continuing to come in. Updates on our live Libya blog. That's the blog there. You'll find all our online content, news, views and analysis updated 24/7. The address aljazeera.net/English. For now, back to you, Anand.
Thanks, Tarek. Now, in 2004, 5 Bulgarian nurses were found guilty by a Libyan court of deliberately infecting hundreds of children at a Benghazi hospital with HIV. They spent years on death row before finally being freed and sent home in 2007. Sonia Gallagher spoke to the nurses who've always maintained their innocence and say they had been tortured into confessing.
It was an ordeal she will never forget. 3.5 years have passed since Valia Chervenyashka and 4 other Bulgarian nurses were released from a Libyan prison. All of them accused of deliberately infecting hundreds of children with HIV. A claim refuted by several foreign medical reports who said that poor hygiene and reused syringes were the most likely cause of the infection. But it took 8 years of legal wrangling and torture before they were allowed back to Bulgaria. Today, working as a pediatric nurse in a northern Bulgarian town, Valia Chervenyashka has put the torment behind her, but she still bears the scars of her time as a prisoner in Libya.
In the jail, the investigators began to question me about my mother's and father's names. Then they started to ask me about AIDS. I told them I didn't know any more than anybody else. And they said, "What do you mean you don't know? You don't know?" They put a pole behind my knees like that, my legs and my arms tied up like this, and they lifted me. I was hanging like an animal. And they started to beat me on my feet with a pipe. And again they asked, "What do you know about AIDS?" I lost my consciousness. They put beetles and other insects on me, and then the electricity on my left arm and the right leg. At this moment, you feel like dying, but I resolved to never sign the false confession.
Well, it took a while for your government to react. You must have been thinking through all this time, what's taking them so long?
We were waiting for help all the time, but our government was not responding, and we did not know why. All the time, the policemen were saying that they will kill us because we are criminals. And then help came really late when Saif al-Islam, on behalf of his NGO, took the matter to the Bulgarian embassy. Saif al-Islam and his father Gaddafi were playing the good and the bad cop.
Years of imprisonment left the nurses in doubt as to whether they would ever leave Libya alive. Their final release left Christiana Vulcheva bewildered.
All of us, we were the same, with the same feeling. Then after, few days later, month after month, you realize and you taste the freedom.
Freedom from the death sentence passed down by Libya's questionable judicial system. A system critics say is dependent on Colonel Gaddafi's whims, rather than the people it's meant to represent. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, Sofia, Bulgaria.
Pakistan is preparing for the funeral of Minorities Minister Shahbaz Bhatti, who was shot dead on Wednesday. His car was ambushed in broad daylight in the capital Islamabad as he left home for work. Pakistan's Taliban say it carried out the attack. Bhatti has been calling for reforms to the country's controversial blasphemy law. Al Jazeera's Kamal Haider joins us now live from Islamabad. And Kamal, what can you tell us about the mood in the country after this minister was gunned down?
Well, as far as the minorities are concerned, they would, of course, be mourning. There's almost 1.5% Christian population in a country which is predominantly Muslim. Now, Bhatti, who was killed yesterday, his body is still being kept in Islamabad. Some of his family members are said to be arriving from overseas, and tomorrow he will be buried in his native town of Faisalabad in the Punjab in a Christian cemetery.
Now, Kamal, there must be questions being raised in Pakistan, not just about security in the country, but also about the personal security for ministers. If a minister like Shahbaz Bhatti was gunned down because he tried to reform a blasphemy law.
Very pertinent question, because the same man, Shahbaz Bhatti, had recorded a statement 4 months ago in which he predicted his death. He said he had received threats from the Pakistani Taliban. He had gone from pillar to post, from the Prime Minister to the Interior Minister to the President, asking for beefing up his security. He wanted a bulletproof car. There are many around here given to other ministers. But despite the fact that this was a marked man under threat, one of the reformists who the government, in fact, helped in the beginning, but the government itself has now distanced itself from those reformists. And of course, his pleas fell on deaf ears, because he had said all along this was a man who was marked.
Is that perhaps a sign that the government has been intimidated into withdrawing any kind of changes to that blasphemy law?
Absolutely. They've done a U-turn on it. In fact, they proposed the reforms in the law. They appointed the religious minister, Mr. Shahbaz Bhatti, to head a committee to propose the amendments. So it was the government who was supporting it. It was the People's Party member, also the former information minister, who was also responsible for floating the bill which would propose those amendments. So the government has since distanced itself from those reformists, despite the fact that it was the government which encouraged them to do so.
Thanks, Kamal. Kamal Haider there in Islamabad. Now, moving on to other news, and Egyptian security officials say 3 people have been killed and 10 injured in clashes between inmates and police at a prison north of Cairo. The jail's director was also injured. Damanhur prison is in Al-Bahira province, north of Cairo. 2 U.S. servicemen have been shot dead as their military coach arrived at Germany's Frankfurt airport. The 21-year-old Kosovan man has been arrested. Kosovo's interior minister, Bajram Rechepi, has identified the suspect as Arif Uka. 2 other Air Force personnel were injured. Thursday is the last day for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to lodge his appeal against a decision by the UK High Court. He's to be extradited to Sweden to face questioning on sexual assault allegations. Assange denies the accusations. The British court gave the go-ahead for Assange's extradition last Thursday. Meanwhile, Bradley Manning, the soldier accused of leaking thousands of classified U.S. government documents to WikiLeaks, is facing more charges. The U.S. Army has filed an additional 22 counts against him, including aiding the enemy. Manning has already been accused of 12 other charges in connection with the material, which was published on the WikiLeaks website. Mexican authorities have found a mass grave in the south of the country. Police in the state of Guerrero say it contains the bodies of at least 17 people. A spokesperson has said the grave was found on Tuesday in the town of San Miguel Totolapan, and that more bodies could be discovered. It's the 5th mass grave found in Mexico since June. Meanwhile, a UN anti-drugs agency is reporting that Mexican drug traffickers are overtaking Colombian gangs in the production and supply of heroin. The report from the United Nations International Narcotics Board also says the purity of Mexican-produced heroin is increasing. The head of New Zealand's Civil Defence Authority says there's no hope of finding anyone else alive after last week's earthquake devastated the city of Christchurch. More than 200 people are still listed as missing. 161 bodies have been recovered but haven't been identified.